Hi, everyone. Today, me, Helevorn, and Wren are going to be talking about how Tolkien influenced both of their works and how they came across Tolkien. So, first of all, Helevorn, can you tell us how you first came across Tolkien's works?
Sure. It was back in 2001 and I was 14. I was in the eighth grade, and it was back when the Fellowship of the Ring film came out, and I had no idea who Tolkien was. And I lived in a place where nobody else knew in Romania, and fantasy wasn't a big thing at the time, and I did not know anyone who read any kind of fantasy and or who watched films that were fantasy. And even so, fantasy was regarded as sort of a childish thing, as if you are still reading fairy tales when you are old. And of course, as a teenager, at least I was quite influenced by what other people thought and everything. So I thought it would be quite uncool to do something so childish as to read or watch something fantasy, because I was this really tough metalhead at the time. I mean, I think I still am. I just am a very someone who's not influenced by other people's opinions, So even though I thought that those people were nerds, but then it came to a point when I thought, okay, but I'm a nerd as well. So can't I be a nerdy metalhead? What's the problem? And so I just embraced my personality. So this is what I am now. So yes, it started when a girl in my classroom saw the film and she told me to watch it. And she assured me that I would like it. I made fun of her at first, and then I watched it, and I was completely in awe, because it fits so well with everything that I already liked at the time. I really loved historical fiction and mythology, and this is what I saw. It wasn't childish at all. It was so deep and so complex, and um, there were so many elements of mythology. Even though I was not very much into Norse mythology yet, I think that it was the Tolkien that drew me into all that.
I
This is my
see.
story.
How about you, Wren?
I was introduced to Tolkien at a very small age. I was the youngest of five, and when I was 5 years old, my oldest brother sat me down for the Rankin Bass cartoon of The Hobbit, so well beloved. And I fell immediately in love with it, even though I think some people would consider that one kind of scary, especially for a 5-year-old. But I was, and I don't think people in my family quite understood this about me, but I liked the scary part of it. I liked that it was, yes, this was a fantasy, but this wasn't all, it wasn't Disney, it wasn't rainbows and unicorns and such. It was a little gritty. There was some real risk, there was some danger. And I loved this approach that was, you could almost say, very intimate, of following Bilbo on this journey into a world that he knows has kind of always been there, but he never had a grasp of how ancient or how deep it was until he was actually thrust into it. And the reader gets to experience that novelty along with him.
They do, definitely. I think it's definitely a more personal journey than Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, kind of like we were saying on the Instagram live, the Lord of the Rings is very much an epic. It's a piece of a culture. It's a piece of history that belongs to the entire world of the Middle Earth. But The Hobbit is more of a personal story. It's Bilbo's story about his experience with this wonderful world. And that contrast is so important. And kind of like Helevorn was saying, the Lord of the Rings is very much a mature approach to fantasy. It's a scholarly approach. And I will say that as much as I think I was too young to appreciate the Lord of the Rings books when I did read them, which I was about 10 or 11 when I started reading those as the movies were coming out, I did nonetheless appreciate especially Tolkien's ability to translate. Like, you could tell, even even before I knew some of the details about what these cultures were based on, where these languages were made from, what was the source that he used, you could still tell that there was, oh, this feels real. I know this has a real world equivalent or parallel. I'm just not sure what it is yet. And that took a little more growing and a little more digging to figure out.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely, that is really exciting that you were able to experience it at such a young age. And I often wonder what it would have been like for me if that had happened to me as well. But I'm pretty sure that I would not have been able to understand it, just like you said earlier, as well as I did at 14, especially the scholarly aspects. Of course, I did not understand them at the time either, but just like you very well put it, Wren, you can sense that there is so much more to it, and that the writer is has such a deep grasp of what he is writing there, and it's mature fantasy, like you said, and I could sense that, and it made me want to make research and really try to understand what he was, what his sources of inspiration were, and his writing process.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think he definitely inspired me to, especially as I've matured as a creator, to put in as much research as I can into a thing and never go into it and say, well, but if I get to this part, what happens there? Oh, I don't know. Like, no, I need to make all that preparation. I can't tell you how many books I have just waiting because I'm like, oh, I know I'll need this for the research.
Definitely.
That's an excellent point. I think this is one thing I learned from Tolkien as well. He's so thorough and so knowledgeable, and you just have to admire that.
Absolutely. There's a lot of dedication that goes into that level, and not only did he were many of his cultures inspired by real world cultures, which is fantastic, and it enriches the world, but the fact that he was able to put his own twist on it, like turning Welsh into Elvish, like turning Norse into Dwarvish, his ability to translate the real into the supernatural is very deft and subtle enough that you could miss it if you weren't looking for it.
Mm-hmm. It really blurs the line between research and kind of creating your own thing, because he really does his research, and then based on that, he creates his own world.
He absolutely does. And that's such an intimidating prospect, to create something so vast, and the history and the mythology and the cultural, there are people who have discussions about how the Lord of the Rings is technically told from a faulty narrator's perspective, that we don't necessarily know that what's going on is what really happened, because it's this poetic retelling and translation, as Tolkien would have us, believe. And that is a lot of work, and it pays off and it works. But when you're facing your own creative process and you're like, okay, how do you even reach that deep? How do you even find that, like, how do you find that within yourself to create that vast of a universe?
Mm-hmm, exactly.
It is definitely intimidating.
Mm-hmm.
And fantasy, the whole genre, I think he really raised the standards for it.
Oh, definitely. He absolutely changed how fantasy is written and how it's read. And I think he really brought a lot of people around, people who thought like you did, that maybe fantasy is this very immature, it's silly, there's nothing about it that's real, so there's probably nothing that has any merit. Some people see fiction on the whole that way, but that's just the thing, is fiction can sometimes teach us more on an emotional, on a psychological level, and perhaps even socially, than a history might.
That's very true, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So which works were you particularly attracted to, Helevorn? Because for Wren, we know that it was The Hobbit. But for you, at the beginning, was it mostly Lord of the Rings that stood out because it was the movies, right?
Yeah, definitely. I began by reading The Lord of the Rings, but I think that what I still think are his best, or at least my favorite, is The Tale of the Children of Húrin. And I also liked the unfinished from the unfinished tales. It was The Mariner's Wife, the story of Erendis and Aldarion. I really, really love these two stories. And The Tale of the Children of Húrin is this tragedy, this very dark story with complex and very flawed characters, especially Turin, the main character. He's so flawed. And I think Fortune's Games that you will be able to recognize one of my own characters who has a bit in common with him. I mean, this is just the kind of character that I've always liked. He's really a gloomy and very serious young man. He's lonely, he is aloof, but also capable
Ingvar.
of deep emotions. Yes, definitely. Um, he can range from seeming detached to near berserker fits. And I'm not sure when I read this story. I had already made up the character of Ingvar at the time, but he wasn't, well, I'm not sure at what point in my writing process this was, but this is just the type of character that I like. It's a sort of ironic hero, if you will, because we were talking about my favorite types of characters, and in one of our previous sessions, I put Ingvar into this category. This Turin has some things in common. There is this scene where he accidentally kills a man, and in order to take revenge on something that man had said to him, he makes him run naked through the woods, and he is chasing him armed, and the man falls down a precipice, and this moment sends Turin into exile. And that is just so dark compared to what we see in The Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit, for example. And I really loved how this story has such complex characters, and you can really see their psychology. And the other one, The Mariner's Wife, I think it has, or at least the other way around, the Merwin and Halvard tale of mine has some Mariner's Wife vibes, because it is about the marriage between two people, but Aldarion is very much in love with the sea. And so they love each other, but their relationship is always kind of distant because he keeps going back to the sea. And the wife knows that she cannot share him with the sea. And this is very psychological. There is barely any plot. Okay, it is tied in with the whole Sauron kind of story, the back story, but there is so much psychology to it. So it almost feels like a realistic psychological tale about a marriage. And I really love these two stories.
That's really interesting because,
I'm
as
curious
someone
to see
who
what
doesn't
Wren
know
thinks.
a lot about Tolkien, I didn't know about these stories, and it feels very different from what I know about The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, because those two are more, I guess you could say, macro. They're less psychological and more focused on the world and the plot and a lot of the mythology.
Yeah, The Lord of the Rings definitely is more detached, like the epic, just as Wren mentioned. Yes, so not so character focused.
Mm-hmm.
The characters sometimes feel symbolic, so that there is not a lot of depth to them. Whereas in these two, yeah, they're really out of the ordinary characters.
Mm-hmm.
And the focus is on them and their
Mm-hmm.
relationships.
I definitely need to read those. I've heard about the unfinished tales and the Tale of Hurin, and I confess I'm embarrassedly remiss in my readings of Tolkien, but you know, and some of his other works too that are interpretations of more long-standing tales, like his Gawain, his Beowulf, and those kinds of things, again speak to his deep love of these cultural ties to Germanic, Norse, and Celtic folk tales and mythology and literature. They I think they deserve a lot more credit than they get, because you know, you say the name Tolkien and people immediately, I think, snap to Lord of the Rings first, which understandably so. It changed the way fantasy as a genre operates. But to understand Tolkien as an author, and perhaps to better understand Lord of the Rings and even The Hobbit, I think it's the most scholarly and the deepest approach, Helevorn, the approach you've taken to go to is more in-depth works that people kind of gloss over in the mainstream.
Yeah, that is true. It's been a long time since I last went through Tolkien's book, so I don't remember all the little stories either. But these are the two that really stuck with me, really powerful stories. And yes, they are, like you said, they are very different from what first comes to mind when you hear Tolkien. And I think that these two stories, and certainly others, but I do not remember them right now, can appeal to different kind of public, I think. So for people who are looking more to find character development and more emotion, you know, than plot and the battle between good and evil and all that. There is a lot of battle between good and evil in the character of Durin, for example. So there's enough of that. We don't need Sauron and all the others.
They're red herrings as far as it's concerned when you get back to, and I think that's something that more people should really be exposed to, because I think a lot of people look at Lord of the Rings and they just go, oh, this is so dry, and some people find it hard to connect. I think especially when we're reading it so much younger, and I read it a great deal younger than you did. So that connection can be so difficult. But I think if we go a little bit, we just dig back into the back catalog a little bit, it helps make the top 10 hits make a lot more sense.
Absolutely, because I was one of those people who couldn't really get into Lord of the Rings. I mean, other than the movies, I tried reading the book when I was like 13 or 14, and I still couldn't really get into it. It was, like you said, sort of dry for me, and it was just a lot of information to digest. I did like the maps and some of the information at the very back, because my copy came with an index of like the different terms and world building stuff. I thought that was interesting, but I couldn't really get into it. The details were too many details, and it always, like, it just felt like I was being overwhelmed. And I'm not someone who's very good with a lot of details. And for me, the simpler the plot, the easier things are. But I guess it was just hard for me to absorb.
Yeah, and I think for me, what made it a struggle was that I am always looking for the character to connect to. Like, okay, if there's somebody I can relate to in this cast, then I have an in. I can get my foot in the door. And that felt really difficult, because kind of like Helevorn said, the characters in the Lord of the Rings feel very symbolic. They're almost like archetypes more than they are individual people. And for another thing, we divide our time between them in such a way that it's hard to stay connected to any one grouping. We switch from being with Frodo and Sam, and we'll be with them for a little bit, and then we'll be with Aragorn, and then we'll be with Merry and Pip, and it's you switch between them at just the pace where you're like, oh man, I can't stay connected to this. But again, coming back to it with the context that it's supposed to be looked at as almost a poem. Yes, it's written in prose, but it's meant to be read in a headspace of, oh, there's a lot of symbolism at work here. This is representative more than it is literal, almost like a scriptural text, in the sense that maybe this stuff isn't literal, but it's there to tell us something. If we can piece together the information, we can grasp a bigger picture.
I
That is
see.
an excellent point, indeed. And here we can see how much Tolkien was interested in medieval literature and how knowledgeable he was of both religious and medieval religious writings, because well, the trend in the Middle Ages was the allegory, right? And this is what the Lord of the Rings really feels like. So he was inspired by this Central and Western European allegorical type of writing and of saga literature. And saga literature is not allegoric, but it is full of a lot of details about characters, and it has tons of characters and jumping from one to the other and endless genealogies. And clearly Tolkien wanted to put his knowledge and his interest, sort of translate it into his own story. So it is a very difficult thing to read. I think that the film became very popular, but the books, I'm actually not sure how many Lord of the Rings movie fans actually managed to go through all the books.
It's so funny. I worked at a bookstore for a while, and I saw this phenomenon as Game of Thrones was ending, that people would come in and they would ask for the first book of Game of Thrones. And some months later, I'd see them start to drop off. And, there'd be one straggler some months later coming in for the third book. Oh my. And I think a bit of that happened with Lord of the Rings as well, because people, and here's the thing too, is anytime you're adapting literature to film, the director, the production team, the actors, they're all putting different spins and different contexts to that story. And I will say that Peter Jackson was able to make Lord of the Rings much more personal. We were able to engage and connect with each of the characters much more consistently than we were in the books. So, and for some people, it may have helped to have the imagery, like to be able to think of Elijah Wood when they're reading about Frodo, or so, something like that. But I think people went to the books looking for the experience of the movie, but in a book, and that's just not the case.
That's true.
That's so true. That's so true. And yeah, both what you said about the films and about the books, they're very different. And I have to say that the films are brilliant. I mean, now even now when I watch them again, I don't know, for over 20 times I watched them, and whenever I watch them again, I still feel that they are brilliant. And the pacing and the aesthetic, and that was an excellent point that you made, Wren, how they managed to make it more personal.
Yeah, and it's I think that struggle is going to be there no matter what intellectual property people are going to. I'm a big fan of Howl's Moving Castle, the book as well as the movie, and I try to recommend the book to people, and it's, they go into it thinking that it's going to be Ghibli, but on paper, and it's not. It is very much not.
But both are good.
But both are good, and both have value. They both have value as their own, even if the movies of the Lord of the Rings were vastly different from the books, which they're not vastly different, but they are a little bit more personal. They both definitely have their value as far as what they can tell us as an audience, what they can tell us as a culture. Every story has something to tell, whether it's exact in detail to its original material or not.
Exactly. How about the video game? I don't know if you guys have played the Lord of the Rings. Was it called MMORPG, like whatever that stands for? But I remember playing a little bit back in 2013, because that was when the Hobbit movies came out. So I was like, hey, time to dive into this again. And I don't know. It was okay for it to be depersonalized because everyone's playing a different character. So it's okay for it to not be personal because it is personal in the way that you kind of create your own character and play it, right? So I guess Lord of the Rings is kind of perfect for an MMORPG experience, isn't it?
I think I never played the games, but I can see Middle Earth as being a wonderful place to set an MMORPG. Just in the sense that there are so many cultures to pick from. There's so many storylines and histories. There's so many interesting cultures that you can be a part of within the world of Middle Earth, that I can imagine it making for a very rich player experience.
I don't think I ever got past the tutorial, but I'm not
Me
very good
too.
with MMORPGs because unfortunately there's nothing to motivate me to keep going on. It just kind of reminded me of RuneScape with better graphics.
I see. Yeah, I definitely have I don't tend to play those kinds of games because when I play video games, I want something that's very character and story driven. Like my favorite obsession video game is Chrono Trigger, which has an amazing time traveling story. It's, you know, it's so much fun. And I think I was especially drawn to those partially because I didn't have to play them initially. I would just watch my brothers play and get the story. But when it comes to those kind of MMORPGs and online stuff, there's not as much of a story. There's, you know, here's a quest, get your friends together, and it's a way to socialize, it's a way to interact with others, but it's not the way to construct a narrative.
Right. So a little bit like Skyrim.
I suppose so. I haven't played Skyrim either. I'm a bit of a grandpa. I don't know what any of the cool kids play.
Skyrim's from 10 years ago, and so that makes me old too. But yeah, Skyrim is not like interactive. It's a single person game, but basically it's like a sandbox game. It's also in a world that kind of is like a Middle Earth because it's in the Elder Scrolls universe. So like in the same franchise as Oblivion from 2006 and some of those older games.
Okay, and by sandbox you mean that the player is constructing a bit of their world. It's there to create whatever you want to create. Is that what we mean by a sandbox game?
Yeah, technically it's not sandbox. I think because you can't really build anything unless you download mods, but it's very free form. Like there is a main story, but you can choose not to follow it. You can just, you know, choose to be a thief or just do nothing and like just sit there the whole day if you want, or hunt deer. Like you can do anything you want. It's not like you're suddenly, you know, in the first person perspective of this person and you have to follow their journey. It's not like that. So you can choose to be anything.
I see.
Yeah. I have to say that I think that I tried the game once, the Battle for Middle Earth, but it belonged to a friend, and I did not connect with it at all because I thought that it did not capture neither the essence of the books and films nor anything that I liked. I mean, not the parts that I actually liked about the books and films, and so I was not into it, even though I am into these kind of games in general. I mean, I did play Skyrim, and as an MMORPG, I still play World of Warcraft from time to time, and I have for like 10 years on and off. And so it's not that I'm not into that kind of games, it just did not, you know, connect to that. With the games that I play, I don't know, I think I just find different things in them. But with Lord of the Rings, I really loved certain parts of it, and those parts were not the game. I mean, in the essence and what it feels like. So yeah, that was my experience with it. Maybe I did not get far enough, but
that's true. I
can see though how it would be difficult to translate. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Yeah.
Well, I was just saying, I can see how it would be difficult to translate the grandiose nature of the films and the epic nature of the story into a video game, particularly a video game where, again, it's centered around interaction and less on narrative. So I can see how that would have been a struggle for the game developers, but if it has the name on it and people will buy it, that's about what counts to the company producing this big game.
That's true. It's all about marketing in the end. But I did think that Lord of the Rings was a free to play game. It's just that, it has microtransactions.
That's a good point.
Yeah, I don't remember that. I have no idea.
Right. So in the next few podcasts that we will be doing 3 ways about Tolkien, we're going to be exploring more specific questions. In our next podcast, we'll be talking to Helevorn about how Tolkien's world building affected the way you developed your novel, Sons of Disobedience, and how Tolkien's dwarves influenced your Norse characters, since the Tolkien's dwarves were influenced by Norse culture. And we'll also be talking about the similarities between historical and fantasy world building, and how does research inform both of them.
I'm really looking forward to that. These sessions are awesome because we get to see how the same books, the same author influenced writers who, the stories are quite different, so we have fantasy and we have historical realism, and we were both influenced by the same writer. So this will be really fascinating to explore.
Right. And
I can't wait to explore this more. So sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think it'll be very interesting, especially to explore how the different cultures of Middle Earth influence the cultures and world building of our respective works. And Helevorn, it's just always a pleasure to get to hear you talk about these, because the Viking culture is very it definitely has a different appearance to popular culture than it does when you really dig into the people themselves. And it's such a pleasure to hear people to hear you talk about, well, this is how we see it on TV, but you've done the research, you've done the reading, you've done the work.
Mm-hmm.
Indeed, this is fascinating, and I'm really happy that you enjoy listening.
Yes, and after that podcast with Helevorn, we will be talking to Wren about how your graphic novel, The House on Capel Hill, will have a lot of world building, since it is a more character-driven work, kind of like The Hobbit compared to Lord of the Rings. What role will world building play in The House on Capel Hill? We'll also look into other questions such as which culture, for example, Elvish or Dwarven from Lord of the Rings or any of other Tolkien's works, was the most inspirational for you, and how did Tolkien's writing style have an impact on how you'll be writing your graphic novel? How about the framing of events and pacing?
I cannot wait to have that session. It's always a pleasure being on here and getting to talk about these works and having, you come up with these wonderful questions that are just things I never thought that I thought about, but having the question helps me think about how to verbalize, well, how does this work? And it helps me shape up my own writing process as well, just to go, oh, I suppose I should be thinking about that, shouldn't I? Consciously rather than subconsciously.
Exactly. I think a lot of the podcasts have helped all of us, especially me, you, Helevorn, Wren, Tete, all of us, to think more about our works and how to verbalize what we want to achieve with our works. Because sometimes we do have the idea, but we don't really know how to express it. And sometimes because we don't express it, it just kind of ends up like receding into the recesses of our mind. And then we kind of lose the point.
Yeah, that is a struggle.
And, recording these and putting them on the channel, makes this like a good record of, the process that we've done so far, since, we actually started this podcast around a year ago, didn't we, Helevorn?
Yes, exactly. It was in August last year.
Yeah, so it's already been a year.
Goodness, are you going to have a special anniversary episode then?
Oh, I never thought about this. Maybe we should.
I think that'd be a lovely idea.
Yeah,
great idea. Thank you.
Yes, we should. It's coming up soon, because I'll check on YouTube when the first episode came out, but I think it was like first week of August, because it was me and Tete first, remember, talking about Gleb, and then you decided to come on.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. Well, thank you so much, you guys. We learned so much about Tolkien, and I can't wait to have you guys on again for another episode about Tolkien.
Absolutely. It's been such a blast getting to talk to the both of you about our common interest in Tolkien. It's, as always, illuminating and inspiring.
Glad that it is inspiring.
Thank
Thank
you
you
so
so
much.
much. Bye.
Thank you. Till next
Bye,
time.
everyone.
Bye.